ready?
Let's do this thing.
Okay.
Glee and
Don't
jubilance.
talk too long because I'm going to start twitching again. All right, welcome back to Sermon Rewind. My name is Todd, and with me is DJ Jazzy Jordan.
Good morning. Good to
Hi.
see you, man.
It's good to see you too.
Yeah.
Mostly.
See, the thing is nobody knows what time it is, but I feel it. We know it. They should feel incredibly privileged to have us
Yeah,
this
still
early.
nobody cares.
Yeah, I know.
There is no time in Sermon Rewind world. All right, we are still long trucking through Acts to the ends of the earth.
Long. We haven't even been there that long yet.
It just feels like we've been here a while.
Oh, that is such an insult.
It's not. It's just
to the authors.
Well, it's what it is. Okay, Acts 4 verses 1 through 22. Another long passage.
Mm-hmm.
You
It's going to shorten up this week.
You better hope that your readers don't unionize or something like that, because
Man,
they're having to grind through some long stuff up
that
there.
is fair. I'll give them that.
But they're doing the Lord's work. Big idea: allegiance to Jesus' message will grant and cost us everything.
Yeah, you got it.
In that order.
Yep, absolutely.
Grant and then cost.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One time or many.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So your first point, the gospel creates powerful conflicts.
Yeah.
Yep. And again, if only somebody had written a book that could talk about how to navigate powerful conflicts.
You know, I know. One of these days I'm going to get an opportunity
wish
to
somebody
meet
would have
this
written that.
person.
Yeah.
Sage advice.
You were talking about qualifying to teach the people, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we assess whether we are qualified to teach the people? Because I remember I think you and I were having this conversation about people on street corners with microphones, and the fact that sometimes they're doing, they're sharing.
Yeah.
They're not very good at it.
Yeah, fair.
They're loud. They're not very articulate, that sort of thing.
Right.
Is that a good question to ask? How do we assess our teaching ability? Or is that one of those things where we would inhibit ourselves from engaging in a conflict because we go, well, I'm not very good at this, so I'm going to leave this to people who are better at dealing with conflict.
I think that's what I'm most concerned about, right? So like the text, or the portion of the text you're talking about, is when the Pharisees, Sadducees, teachers of the law, they didn't deem the apostles as unlearned men, able to teach the men, right? Or to teach the people.
Right.
So the reason I use that as a parallel in that situation is that more often than not, when you're sharing the gospel with somebody, whoever it is, family member, friend, whatever, when you're sharing the gospel with somebody, those who give pushback will often use the excuse, how dare you? You don't know my life. You've not been in my shoes. You don't know my experience. So you don't have any right. You're not qualified to speak into my life this way. So the reality is that we'll receive that pushback a ton. And what you just raised is the biggest concern for me, is that folks who are carriers of the gospel, believers, are going to kind of waltz around it because they're afraid that they can't get past that obstacle.
Right.
The same way the apostles did not try to give any credentials, we ought not to either. If it's true that in faith we've believed it and the Holy Spirit has confirmed it by filling us and bringing fruit in our life, we have nothing to fear. We have the gospel to share. It's not about, well-established or clean and clear words all the time. It's not about being always so sharp and innovative in the way that we communicate it. It's just about being able to tell the truth, that God so loved the world and that it's applicable for people who have ears to hear.
But do you think sometimes people still use the excuse not to learn because they say, well, if God puts me in a situation, the Holy Spirit will take over and he'll give me the words, which we believe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
But you mentioned the disciples not being learned people.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of a unique group.
True.
They hung out with Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? We're not worried whether or not they have a master's degree in divinity.
Sure.
Right? But we have the opportunity to learn a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
And we should.
And we should.
Yes. And you are absolutely right. People use that as an excuse way too often not to.
So you talked about the fact that we were not going to jail.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That was unlikely.
The severity of our punishment.
Well, but why not?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is there situations? I was thinking about this a little bit in terms of, because of the way our country is, you can express yourself religiously all over the place. We have churches. You can meet anywhere. It's your freedom, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, us doing religious activities isn't going to send us to jail. Should we be not in a I want to get myself jailed mindset,
Mm-hmm.
but should that comfort us a little bit? The fact that we aren't going to risk sort of, civil conflict in any way?
Push that out a little further.
Well, I think about abstractly. So the types of people that will say protest, the government or protest a company.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Should
Grade
we
up in arms over Target?
Right.
Yeah.
Should we be out there a little bit risking jail in some ways?
I see what you're saying.
I mean, not that I want to just decide. I want to figure out a way to get myself jailed for the faith, right?
Yeah.
Because I want to live what some of the biblical characters did who were imprisoned,
Yeah.
right? I want to go through that experience. That's not the goal.
Okay, I was just going to say, do you, Todd?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I would say a major misunderstanding in that, and the reason why I try to clarify it on Sunday was the fact that we assume that because it's not our situation, that means that somehow the story doesn't apply to us, right? We have a tendency to distance ourselves a great deal from it because, we don't have this kind of persecution here in America. The reason why they received the persecution that they did for the years to follow, especially, was not because they were religious. It wasn't because they were talking about spiritual things. I mean, the Jews were religious, and everywhere that Rome went, they encountered more religious activity from different people. It was because the Christian faith was a faith of protest. It was something that got into the grains and system of the world, and it said, no, there is only one leader, and there is only one emperor, and it's not Caesar, it is Christ alone, and we are going to call everybody to come and bow knee before him. That's a significant message of issue, right?
Right.
And the reason why we have Christians who just really float under the radar, you're right, it is twofold. It's one, because we do not have a strong protest against sin. We are much happier just kind of, creating church services that people might want to come and check out, as opposed to legitimately going face to face with evil. And then two, because we don't think that this is severe enough of an issue, we just kind of sit on the sidelines altogether. Like you said before, we don't really learn, and we don't think that it's something we have to get all that invested in.
But I do think it's interesting to think about the context of Rome, because, Rome was not necessarily worried, but they were vigilant against religious groups that might unite
Absolutely.
and turn into a political group and try to overthrow.
Right.
It's interesting today in that probably our government doesn't worry about the church overthrowing the government necessarily, but the church certainly has plenty to say sometimes if there are people in office who they don't like, that they proclaim to be evil.
And sadly, things to say if they do like who's often.
Yes.
Yeah.
Strictly hypothetical, of course.
Yes, of course. We wouldn't know what that is.
We don't. Point number 2, the gospel in conflict requires radical belief. So go-to question, how do I know if I have radical belief? Lots of people are going to say, I have belief. Radical it's radical. Mm-hmm. It's a little, do we say crazy?
Yeah, it's out there on the fringe.
It's extreme.
For sure. Yeah. You really have to look with careful, attentive eyes at what's happening. When I said, listen, it's important to note that they had a whole night to think up a plan, right? They had a whole night to, mull over some ideas. John could have said, man, all we have to do is just carefully walk this line. Don't say anything about Jesus, or at least don't say too much. Focus our energy on the fact that the guy was healed. We'll probably just get a slap on the wrist and sent home. Like, there's a way they could have just milked this whole thing. And Peter comes out of left field. And when he comes out of left field, he doesn't just talk about Jesus being the risen Lord and worthy of worship. He does that, but he takes it so much further when he starts pointing fingers at the most powerful group they have in front of them and saying, you crucified him. His blood is on your hands. This is your fault, and you need to come to grips with that. There is a sense in which Peter takes his belief and just magnifies it ridiculously, so that there be no question why he's there and what it is that he needs to communicate.
Because you talked about belief overcoming fear.
Absolutely.
He's threatening a crowd.
Yeah.
And a crowd that could do him
great harm.
Great harm.
Yeah.
So pivot that to today. What do you think the typical American Christian is afraid of? We can shout a lot.
Yeah.
We have a lot of platforms, social media these days.
Yep.
You can just lamb-based people and groups and elected officials and other churches and all sorts of folks. So we're not afraid necessarily of that, but we've got to be afraid of something. What are we afraid of?
Yeah. As petty as this sounds, we're afraid of being ostracized among our community members.
Our community.
Our community,
Our
right?
community.
Our tight-knit group of friends. We don't want to be the weird one. We don't want to be the person, and I've made comments about this all the time. We don't want to be the person who gets accused of being too heavenly minded to be of any earthly good, right? We don't want to be isolated. And then on top of that, we don't want to lose any creature comforts that we have grown madly in love with. We just don't, right? We don't want to put ourselves in a position where we have to do anything outside of the norm for ourselves, which is a real bummer because I think we end up missing a lot of joy in this great story.
Well, and it's fair to say that American Christians are prone to tribalism. And it isn't, and we convince ourselves that sometimes it is other Christians, which it can be,
right?
But it can also just be people who, there's a Christian element, but really the driving force of that tribe is something else, some other ideology.
I think you're onto something with it. Like tease that out a little bit further. Like, what have you seen out here that would give you a clear description of what that looks like?
Well, I mean, you talked about being the weirdo, right? Even in your own congregation, right? I don't see a lot, and I'm not necessarily saying you have to do this, and this isn't necessarily a demonstration of your spiritual fervor, but like we don't see people get down on their knees on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Right?
It's true.
If somebody walked up the aisle and just laid down on the stage, not that the stage is the altar, but we sort of treat it as the front of the church is almost like it's the altar, the Holy of Holies. If somebody did that, there would be people that go, oh, okay then.
Yeah.
That's
hopefully they don't come to Let's Eat.
That's a little out there, right? Yeah. So I think people stay within a set of behaviors. Now, to be fair, I think there's ostracization, but there's also just what our own internal sort of fear of letting ourselves engage with things.
Yeah.
If we let some of that out, who knows what's going to happen? If I express something emotionally, who knows what's going to happen?
You ever feel that way at all?
Sure. Yeah. Because then you say, well, what happens then if if I question one thing, I might question a whole bunch of other stuff. And then who am I, and do I know what I believe, and do I fit with people? Can I keep going to the same barbecues with the same group of people and having a good time?
Yeah.
Right? We latch onto some of that, even if we know this to be what's really important. We should be able to leave friends and family behind.
Sure.
If we feel like they're not really being Christ-like, right?
So then I have a follow-up question for you with this. Hearing the words from Paul that I have become a fool for Christ, like how does that reverberate in your spine?
I mean, fool is an interesting word because then you think about somebody that's dressed up weird and sort of dancing around and just acting the fool.
Sure.
Right? I think of it as sometimes as, it's radical everything.
Yeah.
We were having this conversation before we started about the phrase, how's it going? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time that dialogue is just fine, good, not too bad, can't complain.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What if the question was, the first thing you asked somebody was, what's Jesus telling you today? How have you heard from the Lord right now?
Yeah.
Or to somebody that doesn't have a relationship, say, if you just walked up to somebody and just said, tell me about your worldview. What do you really believe in? What really makes you tick? That would be odd in some ways.
That's fair.
Yeah. Now, I don't have to be loud about it. I don't have to wear strange clothes. But it does get at something much deeper than just, hello.
Yeah.
Nice to see you. How you doing?
And isn't it odd, though, or at least wouldn't you agree that it's odd, and I don't mean to belay the point, but that this isn't common conversation among believers, really? That it does feel odd, or that would feel odd?
Yeah, but I think there are moments. Like not that I'm great at this, but I will sometimes ask people, I'll say, how are you for real?
Yeah.
And the interesting is I think I tend to get different answers than if I just said, how's it going?
Yeah, that's fair.
Because then people are like, oh, that that feels like a different question. That feels like you actually want to know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All right, last point. The gospel believed produces unshakable hope. As a Star Wars fan, I had to think about The New Hope, and I had to think about
Of course you did.
rebellions are built on hope.
Yeah.
But that sort of made me think about that. Like, we can say, well, we're putting our hope in a savior, putting hope in salvation, but more sort of tangibly right in front of us. What am I hoping for, right?
Yeah.
And am I trying to overcome something? I hope that I can do what?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't even know if it's a hope that you can do something. My encouragement from that point is to sort of fill in the answer to the question that I think anybody would ask with regard to the second point, right? That if a gospel in conflict needs to be something that has radical committed belief from you, right? And so if the average person says, okay, if I step off the threshold into this radical, faithful belief, what's going to happen? Because I am going to lose a whole bunch of really important things to me. So how do I rebound in that situation? And the encouragement is that this stream of supernatural, God-given, gracious, kind, benevolent hope fills the heart of the believer. No different than anyone else. Like when you finally make a decision to say, man, I'm crossing the line. I'm all in on whatever thing that is that you're all in. Like if you say to yourself, okay, I love my fiance or my girlfriend. She's amazing. I'm going to ask her to marry me. I'm crossing that threshold. When you do that, where does all of your excitement, all of your joy, all of your hope go in? It goes into the fact that this woman may in fact be your wife now, right? No different. You go all in with Jesus, identifying with him, laying your life down beside him. And the promise for you is that he remains, that he shows up, that he fills you, that he never leaves nor forsake. There's a significant promise on the back end of that.
Okay, but I want to ask a follow-up to that because at the very end, you were talking about belief and the fact that, and it makes sense. If you don't actually believe this, none of the things that you do matter.
Sure.
Like I know why you shy away sometimes away from the practical stuff because people will gravitate towards the practical and they'll just say, oh, well, as long as I do Jordan's checklist, I'm good. I understand why you say, look, if it's not fueled by this unshakable hope, radical belief, then you're just doing charity work, right? But is belief too passive for some people? Because you're going to have a bunch of people yesterday that said, yep, with you, Jordan, I believe. Yep, definitely believe.
Yeah.
I believed for 57 years. So nice sermon, good work, moving on, right? What does that doubling down? I mean, you gave the tangible example of, you love somebody, you ask them to marry you.
Right.
That's a step.
Yeah.
What is it for somebody that's been sitting in that pew for 50 years? What does doubling down look like beyond the abstract of passionate, all in, all for Jesus mindset?
Yeah. I will share a quick story from someone here in this congregation. I won't use their name. Your identity is protected. But I had a conversation with them maybe a year ago now. But they came into my office, really, you could tell the look on their face, their countenance was one of like heaviness. I really want to talk to you about something. And they confessed that after 84 years, of which they would refer to 84 years in the faith as they were baptized in the church, they'd regretfully, never shared the faith with anyone. They owned that. They were perplexed by it, confused by it, hurt by it. And, this wasn't a moment of like wagging finger or guilt and shame. This was a moment of doing two things. It was one, informing them that you're not dead yet. So take up that call. If you believe this, believe it in a way where your feet and your hands are moving, right? So it's not hard. There are people that we're walking past every day. There are people that we engage with intimately every day that don't know the hope in Jesus. Could be family, could be friends, could be neighbors, could be anyone. Take advantage of that moment. And I would argue, join in the greatest adventure and story the world will ever know. Like that's the thing. It's not do this, begrudgingly difficult, dredging through the muck and mire experience. Sure, it might feel that way, but this is the most deep and meaningful your life is ever going to get. You're going to find more joy, more pleasure, more hopefulness, more passion in this than you're going to find in anything else. And if you don't, it very well mean that you're just still kind of teetering on that line, wondering if you buy it at all.
Okay. Thank you.
For sure.
Thanks again for joining us on Sermon Rewind. If you're in the Bellflower area, we'd love to see you on Sunday mornings at 10, Wednesday nights at 5:45, all kinds of cool stuff going on. And leave us some comments, whether it's good stuff or some room for improvement. It's all good. Thanks again for joining us on Sermon Rewind, and may your life and week and day be radical.
See you soon.